Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our second lecture as the lecture series in Ho Chi Minh and Osher Center. We have many new faces joining us today, so welcome everybody. I'm Iman. I'm a physician and also licensed acupuncturist, and I'm the director of the Osher Center. Thank you for joining us today. As you know, it's a series with 5 lectures. We already had the first lecture last month. The theme of the series are brain health and nutrition. We really want to focus on what can we do to optimize our brain function and protect our brain function. For those of you who are joining us tonight, the previous series have been recorded and you can see them on our website. If you cannot find them, please feel free to email us and we'll direct you to where you can find them. I have my esteemed colleagues here tonight with me, Chef Jared and Kelly Moreau, and they will be having an interactive cooking session for us. And hopefully some of us have prepared the ingredients and we'll be cooking all together. But before we get to the cooking session, I will be doing a very short presentation regarding the gut health and brain health and how they are interrelated. But before we get to the presentation, I would like to do some introduction regarding our Osher Center and also the Ho Chi Minh funds. And need to thank the Ho Chi Minh family who have made these funds available at Osher, and we are using those funds for these presentations. Regarding the Osher Center for Integrative Health at the University of Washington brings together conventional and complementary practices in a coordinated manner to promote health, illness prevention, and healthy living. We emphasize a holistic, patient-focused approach to healthcare and wellness, treating the whole person. The UW Osher Center provides integrative medicine consults, integrative primary care, and massage at this point. Regarding the Ho Chi Minh funds, the Ho Chi Minh Endowed Fund for Integrative Medicine was established for the purpose of promoting the understanding and translation of research findings in integrative, East-West, and other complementary and alternative medicine disciplines in the Division of Internal Medicine at University of Washington. The endowment honors Mr. Ho Chi Minh, an industrialist and philanthropist who had an abiding fascination with the potential contribution of traditional Chinese medicine modalities to modern biomedical practices. This endowment represents a personally significant component of Mr. Ho Chi Minh's legacy. So thank you, Ho Chi Minh family, and especially my dear colleague, Emily Wong, who oversees these funds and collaborates closely with us. With that, Rachel, before I start my presentation, I thought that you want to mention something regarding the questions. If the questions come up, how we are going to manage that. So please go ahead.
So throughout this presentation, we're going to be utilizing the QA function, which is in the bottom bar of your Zoom screen. So if you submit your questions, Dr. Majd and I will be moderating those. We'll either put the answer in the text chat or the Q&A answer screen chat, or we will answer it verbally. If it's verbally, it will let you know. If you still need more clarification, please go ahead and submit another question. So we look forward to hearing from everyone.
Wonderful, thank you. So I think I am ready, or we are ready for the presentation. And let's start. Rachel, are you sharing it?
No, you are.
Oh, I am. Oh, okay. Wonderful. Okay. Sorry for the delay. I then need to find it then. Sorry about that. I thought that it's going to be opened through Rachel. Okay, I have it here. And I am the driver, correct, Rachel?
Correct.
So let me share my screen. Okay, can people see my screen? Yes, okay. Now I need to change it to. Okay. Great. We are in business.
Wait a second. Yeah. There you go. Thank you.
Sure. We are going to talk a little bit about healthy gut and healthy brain and how our gut health actually ensures our brain health. And the intention of this very brief and short presentation is not to get too much into the details of the brain-gut axis and how it really works. We will have a general understanding of the relationship between brain and gut health and brain health. But the intention of this presentation is kind of move us towards better understanding of the meal that we are going to prepare together, that the elements and the ingredients that are incorporated in that meal and how beneficial they are for our gut health and by virtue our brain health. So this is the topic. In order to, the objectives of this presentation: learn how gut health is related to the brain health, learn an easy to prepare meal with anti-inflammatory effects, and have a better general understanding of the spices that we're going to use and their anti-inflammatory effects. And for disclosure, I don't have any conflicts to disclose. And if there's some names and photos used in this presentation are solely for the educational purposes. In order to understand the gut health and brain health, I think first we have to understand the gut-brain axis. This gut-brain axis means that the brain talking to the gut, or our intestines, intestinal system, and our intestines and our gut talking to the brain, and how they interact. The interaction from brain to the gut is it's very easy for all of us to understand. For example, we use our senses. I see food, I smell food, I hear somebody's cooking in the kitchen, and the next thing I notice, I'm salivating, my intestines are moving, and I start feeling kind of hungry. So these are the messages that my senses stimulated the brain stimulated my digestive system, and that's how brain works with the digestive system. Now, the other part is that how does the gut actually work with the brain? And this gets a little bit complicated. So our gut or our digestive system through three different mechanisms actually works, and these three different mechanisms, they all work together and collectively correspond and talk to the brain and make sure that brain gets what it needs. And we're going to review these three different mechanisms. One of these components of, and this is the non-modified or non-simplified version of gut and brain axis. The other one was the simplified version of it, so we can see and understand. This is a little bit more complex. Now we're going to focus on the gut and get a little bit of understanding of what are these three mechanisms in the gut that work together and communicate with the brain. The first part in the brain, in our gut, is the gut microbiota or microbiome. We use these terms interchangeably. What are these microbiota? What is the microbiome? We have heard a lot about this, and this is a collective group of microorganisms in the gut. These microorganisms are mostly bacteria, and they have a role that they play in the digestive system. Part of the role is they help with the digestion. They also help with synthesizing vitamin K, which is necessary for the body, and a group of vitamin B family, which again are necessary, especially when it comes to nervous system. The other function of these microorganisms in the gut is to ensure the integrity of the gut lining. When you think about the intestines, they have a lining, and this lining is responsible in absorbing the nutrients. If this lining is distorted, there's a problem with absorbing the nutrients. So as part of the work that these microorganisms or this microbiome does in the gut, make sure that this lining stays intact. If this microbiome is distorted for different reasons, we call it dysbiosis. And there are some studies coming up that they're talking about dysbiosis being linked into some mental conditions such as depression and anxiety. I have 2 slides at the end of this presentation that has listed some studies regarding dysbiosis and inflammation and relationship to psycho-emotional issues. And for your reference, you can look at them. The second component of in our guts is the nervous system that we have in the gut. Our gut system, our intestinal system, and digestive system has its own nervous system. We call it enteric nervous system. And this enteric nervous system produces some chemicals. We call them neurotransmitters. From these neurotransmitters, some of them you're very familiar with, like it produces serotonin, it produces dopamine and GABA. For a lot of us, we are familiar with serotonin and dopamine. Like serotonin, we know that in the brain, what does it do? In the brain, it deals with anxiety and depression. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter of happiness, satisfaction, and pleasure. GABA is the neurotransmitter, is inhibitory neurotransmitter, deals with pain, reducing the intensity of the pain or intensity of some of the sensations. So surprisingly, these neurotransmitters are being produced in the gut. And about 50% of the serotonin in our body is actually being produced in the intestines. So that kind of reflects the complexity and advancement of the nervous system that we have in our gut. And through these neurotransmitters, we have seen that the gut and the gut nervous system regulates the mood, behavior, and cognitive function. Now, in order for this nervous system to function properly, the microbiota needs to be present, the microorganisms need to be present, and they work very closely with the nervous system. The third component in our gut system is the immune system. We all have heard a lot during this COVID period that immunity, inflammation, pro-inflammation, and that's exactly what happens in the gut. First, we need to understand that the biggest component of the immune system in the body is our intestine. It's not in our skin, it's not in the respiratory system, but it's in our intestine. And it does a very good job responding to stimuli. For example, if I ingest something that my body doesn't like it, in 10, 15 minutes, I'll break into hives. What is it? It's histamine. The immune system got activated, produced histamine. Histamine caused inflammation and broke into hives. Or if I'm lactose intolerant, then I drink milk or dairy components, and then my atopic eczema can get worse, or I can have some cramps. The other example would be people who have arthritis. When they take nightshades, if they eat tomato or other nightshades, the day after they start complaining that my joints are really stiff. They feel the stiffness in their joints. So these are all the reflections, and that it shows that the immune system in the gut got activated. And as an activation of the immune system, we have the cytokines and inflammation presented, and inflammation caused some reaction in the body. So the gut microbiome, or the microorganisms in the gut, they work very closely with this immune system as well. And again, there are some studies that show that the imbalance of this microbiome can cause activation of the immune system and inflammation. Now, when we look at these studies, the question on the table that still we have to do more studies is dysbiosis, is imbalance of this gut microbiome the cause of anxiety and depression and other brain-related dysfunctions, or is there a link, or is it a correlation? What exactly it is, we are not quite sure, but we are seeing some data based on animal studies that it's more than just a link between dysbiosis and anxiety and depression. Maybe there is some causality, but as I mentioned, this is a new field and we need more studies in that field to come to a conclusion. So in order for us to have a healthy gut, we need to protect our microbiome. Our microbiome, the good bacteria will be sitting there, they will interact with our immune system, they will interact with the nervous system in the gut, and collectively, they will talk to the brain. And the way that they talk to the brain, or what they produce, like the neurotransmitters or the cytokines, that matters to ensure the health of the brain. So in order for this system, the gut system, to work properly and produce what brain needs, we have to ensure that we have a good microbiome. We have good bacteria in the gut. Now, okay, so what are the offending factors for this microbiome? We have heard a lot about different things here: antibiotics, infectious diseases. Stress could be a factor because it affects the HPA axis. HPA is hypothalamic pituitary adrenal. By producing a lot of cortisol through this axis, then cortisol can affect actually the inflammation in the guts. But the one that, and then we have the environmental issues, but the one that we are going to focus tonight is the diet. How does diet actually affect these probiotics? How does, these microorganisms in the gut? Processed food, high sugar content, unhealthy fats, and low fiber in the diet. These are the main offending factors. And unfortunately, about 60% of American diet is highly processed food. When food is being processed, it has additives and preservatives. These additives and preservatives are foreign to the body. So when they get ingested, then they cause inflammation. They stimulate the immune system in the gut. They cause inflammation. And as a result of inflammation, then this collaboration between gut and brain gets distorted. And it can eventually create the environment for future outcomes such as anxiety and depression. Now, these are some facts. As you can see here in this slide, the gastrointestinal tract, we call it our second brain. You saw that in our gut, we produce dopamine, serotonin, and other neurotransmitters. The number of the microorganisms in our gut are really significant. There are 100 trillion with a T. So when it comes to the cell count, our human cell bodies, we are really outnumbered by these microorganisms. And they're essential to our physiological functions. They produce vitamins, they produce fatty acids, essential fatty acids and enzymes, and they help us with digestive system, which we already talked about. Now, these are some of the factors that can eventually impact the gut microbiome from the time that somebody is born, the way they're born, and the feeding, stress. We talked about HPA axis and stress and high cortisol affecting the microbiome. Diet, we are going to talk a little bit more tonight about it. Pharmaceuticals, we mentioned antibiotics, geographical area where people live and the kind of food they eat, and life cycle. Our microbiome changes throughout our life from being a kid to adolescent and then mature and elderly. There are some changes into the gut microbiome. Okay, so now let's say that we want to come up with a plan to protect our gut microbiome. What can we do? We have all heard about probiotics. Yes, probiotics are out there. We have to pay to purchase them. And then the question is about the quality of these probiotics. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they alive or not? Because what we actually need to put the live bacteria in our system. So what else can we do? We can use food ingredients. We can use food items. And when you look at these food items here, we have yogurt, we have kombucha, we have kefir, we have natto, we have all these fermented food that they bring the probiotics, the live bacteria with them. And as part of the ingredients that we have for tonight, we are going to use yogurt, which is cultured and has probiotics. Probiotics will not necessarily sit well in the digestive system. They need the environment, and the environment will be provided by prebiotics. So prebiotics are the fibers that they go and make the environment ready for the bacteria and microorganisms to come and sit there and start growing. And in the dish that we have tonight, we have a good amount of prebiotics that my colleague will talk about. So in a nutshell, our gut-brain axis is bidirectional. Inflammation starting in the gut can affect other systems and organs in the body. And there's a link between gut microbiome inflammation and some mental health conditions. And integrity of the gut microbiome is essential to prevent inflammation and protect our brains. And food can be a good source to provide needed probiotics and good source of probiotics and good bacteria for the gut. And these are some studies that I've listed here for you guys, and you can look through it. And this is about studies on gut microbiota and its relationship with depression and anxiety. This is some other studies regarding the immune system and inflammation and how it can affect the brain, causing anxiety, depression, as I mentioned. Still, we have some work to do in the field of research to better understand, is it a causal relationship, or it's a linkage, or it's just a incidental findings. But studies that are coming out, they are showing that there is a more than just a link between, there could potentially be a cause relationship between dysbiosis and some of the psycho-emotional disorders that we have. And with that, I am going to introduce my colleagues now, and then we can all start cooking together. So the first thing, Chef Jared is a seasoned chef and a culinary entrepreneur, embarked on his food industry journey at 15 and never looked back. With extensive experience working alongside renowned chefs, he earned accolades such as I believe it's Jean Banchet. Did I say it right? Thank you.
Banchet, that's great. Wonderful.
Award. Thank you. He's passionate about sustainable agriculture and innovative restaurants. Jared has made a significant impact at the acclaimed Green City Market and as a culinary and kitchen design consultant. He currently serves as the Director of Culinary at the Stanley Isaac Center, driving a culinary training program for New York City's youth. Chef Jared is joining us tonight through the Common Threads program. Kelly Morrow is a registered dietitian, nutritionist with experience in nutrition education and counseling. She has been a faculty member at Bastyr since 2002, supervising clinical rotations and teaching in various departments. Kelly also maintains a private practice and has worked in radiation oncology, Parkinson's care, and community health. Currently, she sees patients at Seattle Integrative Medicine, providing an integrative, body-positive, gender-affirming, and non-diet approach to nutrition. And with that, Chef and Kelly, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Doctor. Great presentation. Your spice photo on the first page, I'm going to try to recreate that as we go into the garam masala. So thank you for the intro. I'm tuning in here from New Jersey, actually, by way of originally Chicago. As you mentioned, did some work with the Green City Market and the local agricultural scene and Midwestern agricultural scene through restaurants and my catering business. And so, now I act as a consultant and work with a variety of nonprofits, including Common Threads. So here on behalf of Common Threads and their representative, I just want to say thank you for having us. Pleasure working with you all, and hope we're going to have a good time cooking tonight. Common Threads used to be based in Chicago, but is now headquartered in Austin, reaches across the country, and serves over 10 cities, and with a healthy and nutrition forward culinary programming ethos, and works with a lot of very young kids up to adults such as yourself. So awesome to be here. And Kelly, if you wanted to say any few words before I get going on Spiceland, go for it.
No, I think I'm good. I'm curious. I'm excited to see what you're going to make.
Great. Awesome. Wonderful. So as we've discussed, and you may have received in an email, we're making chana masala tonight. We're going to add a side of raita with some nice live culture yogurt worked into there as we're talking about probiotics. And we've got a really lovely spice blend that I encourage you, if you want to stock up your spice cabinet, to make your own. And we'll talk about tips and tricks there. But we are going to just go through the process of making a garam masala, or as it's translated to my knowledge. I don't speak Hindi. I'm not going to pretend like I do, nor am I South Asian in heritage, but I've cooked this recipe quite a bit. It's an amazing recipe, and for chefs and home cooks of all walks of life. So, but the garam masala effectively translates to mixed spice. So there's a variety of spice blends throughout both India and Pakistan that kind of are regional, very regional, not kind of, they're very regional. For example, a Madras curry is something that you maybe have heard of, but we're going with garam masala, which again can be different based on the jar you pick up at the store versus what we're gonna put together tonight. So we'll make a spice blend. We're gonna walk through incorporating that into our chana masala, and chana being the chickpea, the highlighted dish there. Chickpea with spices and tomatoes. It's a nice earthy and warm dish. It stays vegan and vegetarian if you keep the ghee out. A lot of times you incorporate ghee into South Asian cooking. We're working with just oil tonight, or at least I am, but that's up to you. And then while that's stewing away on the stove, I'll be switching my camera over. Maybe notice that I have two cameras going here, so you can pin which one has a better vantage point for you, or whatever one my big hands aren't blocking the board. But I will be turning the screen down, kind of comes off to do a little overhead view for the cutting board. But while that's stewing away, we'll whip together the raita, and then there's garnishes and side dishes galore. If any of you have had a lovely meal from anywhere in India or Pakistan, you get all the different accoutrements and maybe fresh naan bread or paratha, or some beautiful fluffy rice, or jeera rice, jeera being cumin, the Hindi word for cumin. So I'm salivating already. We should get cooking. I'm going to go ahead and share screen really quickly, because I just like to walk through the recipes just briefly before we get going. So I have a few here that I should be able to share. Can everybody see my screen? Wonderful. Okay, great. So this is our common threads. Again, we teach ages, and our clients, participants, students of all walks of life, all ages. So we have pretty solid and simple foundational cooking recipes in our arsenal. You can go to commonthreads.org, and there are a ton of recipes. Some of them I really enjoy, and some of them I've never cooked before, frankly, because there's not enough time to go through all of them. But there's a lot of gems in there, and something like this is one of them, because it can serve as a foundation for a lot of dishes. So we've got this garam masala this can be made ahead. A lot of times there's little nutrition facts and tips that are worked into our recipes, and even some cultural facts here. Here we have another translation of hot spices or mixed spices, or blended spices, all acceptable, I believe. So our garam masala for the common threads recipe here, and if you made it before, great. It's got a half teaspoon nutmeg, half teaspoon clove, a teaspoon of cinnamon, tablespoon of cumin. Again, that's a very prominent flavor, or if you've seen it as jeera, Jeera. And then we've got 1.5 teaspoons each of ground pepper, being black peppercorn there, cardamom, which can come in green or black, depending on the green is going to be a little more floral. The black is going to be a little more earthy. And then you've got coriander. In other cultures, you'll see fresh coriander or dried coriander. A lot of times we call it cilantro, which is the fresh version of coriander, but the coriander is the seed when the cilantro plant bolts. And then you can dry it and toast it. So in every recipe, we always have a mise en place, which means things in place. If you want to be a little fancy in French, it's just getting your stuff together before you go on your trip, as far as I'm concerned. So in this case, it's just measuring the spices out. And then if you're using whole spices, which I am going to demonstrate a little bit of, you're going to grind them up. I'm going to take it even one step further and toast them to release a lot of those nice aromatics, some of the oils that exist in the spices as well. And Kelly can elaborate on that as well when we're working on that. And then in the case of storing it into an airtight sealed Tupperware or storage container, you want to keep spices out of light and in a cool, dark place, kind of like you would with potatoes, or a storage vegetable like that you could keep at room temperature. We have a chicken saag recipe that it references here. And then it gives you tips if you're using whole spices. So that's our garam masala. We'll come back to that, and I'll be talking about that in real time, and I can reference it. And then this is our chana masala recipe. It won an award. That's pretty cool. It's a favorite amongst the kids even as well. So if you're trying to feed a full family, the little bit of spice too is nice, but you can always kind of play around with that based on your family's taste. This is a recipe for 4 servings. I'm actually doubling it just because I like to make a larger pot, and this keeps really well. I can eat it for breakfast. I can eat it for lunch. Sometimes I just eat it cold, to be quite honest, and I'm too lazy to even heat it up. I think it's really nice like that too. So we're working with oils here. It says canola oil. If you're going to be using canola oil, as I think we're all talking about good, clean ingredients and healthy ingredients, you're going to want cold expeller press, really high quality GMO-free canola oil. We don't have a line big enough for that. A lot of times when I'm working with the classes, we promote olive oil a lot, being one of the best heart healthy fats. And then there's a lot of other good oils out there, especially with a dish like this that you're going to cook with high heat and maybe really toast your spices hard and your onions and garlic and ginger. And that would be something like grapeseed oil or sunflower oil, rapeseed oil, things like that. But again, if you can find cold expeller press, single source, especially with olive oil, when you start sourcing olive oils from all over the world, if you see multiple countries, there's no regulating body that is watching to make sure that that oil isn't being cut with other oils or pumice oils even, or something worse possibly. So I like to just find good single origin olive oil and find something that's affordable, frankly, too. You're not going to want to cook with extra virgin, that's finishing oil. If we're going to be cooking with an olive oil, you just a classic standard olive oil, virgin, not extra virgin. Okay. Then we've got salt. I like to use kosher. I guess you could use Malden. Gets a little pricey, but nice flaky salt works well too. We've got our garam masala blend that we're using 2 tablespoons of. I'll be using 4, quarter cup. We're going to knock that in. We've got fresh cilantro, our jalapeno. If you want to turn the heat up, you can use something like a serrano or even a bird's eye chili or a Thai chili kind of profile. Again, if we're going to kind of cross continents a little, or cross country lines a little, I guess, not continents necessarily there, but we've got an onion. I'm just using a standard yellow. That's pretty traditional, but you could be using a yellow, instead of a yellow, a white, a red, shallot even. We've got garlic. If you're a garlic fiend, go for it. Clip that up a little bit. I love garlic and it's so good for us. Fresh ginger. And then it says prepared or canned chickpeas. 1 3/4 cups is 1 3/4 cups is 1 15 or 15.5 ounce can. If you drain it, or if you're cooking them fresh, which if you have the time and you like cooking your pulses fresh, go for it. And you can make them a lot healthier as far as I'm concerned, because you can control the sodium and all the additives. I always say that if canned foods can be great, they're convenient and they're cooked and ready for us, and encourages us to eat maybe some beans or legumes or pulses or chickpeas, whatever it is, that we're not as, we don't always have time to cook from scratch. But the thing is that there's often a lot of salt and sometimes even sugar is packed in it. So always just check the label. We just always say, look for low sodium or check the label there. In getting ahead of the question about soaking beans, it's not always necessary. From many a farmer that I worked with that dry their own beans and chickpeas and all that, it depends on the freshness. So if it is a dried bean or something in the pulse world that's been sitting on a shelf for a long time in your pantry or maybe at the store and you don't see it cycle much, it probably could use a soak, because that's going to help you. Otherwise, though, you can go ahead and just cook them straight away. Maybe give them a rinse just to make sure, and strain them just to make sure that there's no impurities. But yeah, and then baking soda if you want them to break down. That helps break down the cell wall, like if you're making hummus with chickpeas. Diced tomatoes. I got a fire roasted can. You can get the ones with some seasoning in there, but again, keep an eye on high salt, high sugar added nature to it, and then any seasonings and flavorings that you maybe just aren't familiar with or don't know how to pronounce. I usually am of the rule, if I can't pronounce it, I probably at least want to research it before I consume it if it's on the back of a label. And with tomatoes as well, the larger the product is, the closest to its whole entity that it started, the less processed it is, right? If you get whole canned tomatoes versus crushed, it's been processed less, so you know you're getting the real deal rather than just some byproduct and scrap. Doesn't mean that all crushed tomato is scrap, but it can be, very well can be. It kind of trickles down the chain there. And then we've got some lemon. So we've got lemon and lime both for our raita, but we'll get to the raita in a little bit. I don't need to necessarily walk through that. But in the case of this dish, we're going to be cooking our onion to start. A lot of times you start by caramelizing onions really hard for a curry. I'm not going to go too hard because I don't want to set off my smoke alarm. That is, I think, the most sensitive smoke alarm east of the Mississippi River out this way. So I'll keep an eye on that. We're gonna cook down our onions though, and then what we're gonna do is add our ginger, garlic, and jalapeno. I'm gonna hold back the cilantro. It says cilantro in there. A soft herb like that, I'm gonna wait till the end, or else it'll kind of lose its flavor and possibly burn. And then we're gonna toast our spices through there as well. So a key part of a lot of South Asian curries is that you get a really hard toast and even a fry on the spices. And mustard seeds, sometimes whole even, you're gonna see I'm gonna use mustard seeds. So we'll be getting a nice cook on all of that foundational flavor. I've even seen people blitz up garlic, ginger, hot chilies, and onion all into a paste and just cook that straight away. That can save you some time though too. But we're gonna go ahead and do a little knife skills here. Once we get all of those foundational flavors cooking, that's the most important part. We're gonna add our tomato, chickpea, a little bit more salt and water, and then just let it kind of simmer and stew away and let all those flavors marry and bind together. So serve with lemon. You can squeeze some lemon juice into it as well to kind of brighten it up. I find that lemon and spice helps curb our need for salt. And so if we're talking about keeping sodium at bay, I think that's a couple really good things here. So I'm always squeezing acid or splashing vinegar into dishes. And then in the case of spices too, I love spicy food. If it's not your thing, that's okay. But spicy food also kind of wakes up the senses like salt can. Salt should be making our food taste like it's supposed to taste, not salty. Salt shouldn't make things taste salty, if that makes sense. Unless you're eating popcorn, maybe, I don't know. But I'll stop sharing there. I'm gonna pull the screen down and actually put my spices here, and I'm gonna let Kelly chime in because I just yapped a lot and maybe a little fast. So is there anything that especially you want to point out before I keep going?
Well, I just appreciate the organization of how you set all this up. And, as Dr. Majd was talking about that, all of the sort of academic aspects of why we might eat different components in our food and how that might affect not only our gut, but our brain. What you're doing is showing us the way that really turns into delicious food, time-honored food, cultural foods. And these herbs and spices that you're talking about, as well as a lot of the other plant-based ingredients, they embody all of that. So we're looking at, the prebiotics. So those are foods like onion, garlic, legumes, chickpeas. We find lots of other aspects that are beneficial in herbs and spices, like antioxidants, or that's a kind of a simplistic way to look at it, but we can think of herbs and spices as having phytochemicals in them that help to speak to our genes and regulate things like our immune system and our antioxidant systems. They can boost our antioxidant systems within our body. They can interact with our liver to help get rid of things from our body that might be harmful to our gut or our brain. So there's so many protective aspects. And I think ages ago, people never really thought about this they were thinking of it more from the perspective of what tasted good, what made their bodies feel good. And now we understand more about how these real foods are so beneficial. And so I think, with preparing and cooking your own foods, it's important to think about how that whole food aspect is so important, that when we're eating ultra processed foods or highly processed foods, that we're going to be missing out on a lot of these components many times that really just help our gut and our brain work at a much higher level.
Awesome. Incredibly well said.
Chef and Kelly, there are two questions that I wanted to ask you guys. The first question is about ghee. Is ghee healthy alternative? And if yes, when should we use it and what temperature can it tolerate? So that's the first question regarding ghee. The second question is regarding olive oil. when shouldn't we use olive oil and what temperature? So if you can give us some info, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, both of those, one of the things that I always look at or think about when we're talking about any type of food is this something that is time honored, been used in cultures for a long period of time, different people around the world who have eaten these foods. So we could definitely say yes for both of those. And then whether or not they're healthy, I mean, usually things that aren't healthy don't really have that kind of time honored nature to them. So obviously these are foods that can be nourishing, and they also have a culinary aspect that's important. I would say, you know, if you have high cholesterol levels, you might be careful about how much ghee you might eat, because it does have saturated fat. It has the proteins and the solids removed so that it has a higher smoke point. So you can actually cook and toast spices in it without, you know, butter will burn at a much lower temperature. So, you know, that is one aspect of ghee that makes it, from a culinary perspective, a little bit easier to use. And in terms of olive oil, are there times we might not want to use it? I mean, I haven't really thought about it from that perspective. I mean, I think there are some people who have digestive issues that might have to be careful about how much fat they might take in, or if they have really high triglycerides, thinking about, you know, how much fat that they take in. But interestingly enough, I mean, olive oil is used so much in research and looked at in terms of Mediterranean eating, and usually trying to get people to eat more of it to support health, because it has a lot of those phytochemicals in it that are so beneficial, and the types of fats that are in it are also really heart healthy. So I'm not really thinking of times when it might not be good, other than if someone just needs to be careful about how much fat they might take in.
Yeah, I would echo everything you just said, Kelly. I would add the only time I really don't use olive oil, or I would stay away from it, is for frying food or doing really high heat, like sauteing, just because one, it does have a little lower smoke point, in some cases a decent amount lower than some of the, like the grapeseed oil that or even peanut oil, but then you're talking about allergens there, or a major allergen. But also it's just such a fruity and delicious oil that, like, heating it up that much, you lose a lot of the flavor that I love out of it. Now, if you ask some Italians or my Italian relatives, they tell you can do literally everything with olive oil. You can plug a hole in the wall. You can benefit your skin. You can grease up a wheel chamber or something like that. Olive oil is for everything, but I would say I just stay away from frying. But I stay away from frying generally, anyways. But if you're doing a little bit of like shallow frying on the stove, just be careful that if you smoke it out, if you see it smoking, then you probably burned it and it'll get bitter and it'll lose a lot of that flavor. But yeah, and then ghee, like I referenced it, just if you have somebody eating, keeping vegan, or you're trying to do that, or watching, cholesterol levels, I think keeping the butter out, but it's clarified butter. So if you've ever clarified butter, same concept. I highly recommend that if you're going to cook with ghee, don't buy, in a pinch, buy it from the store. I'm not trying to discourage you from that. Or if you have it, there's no shame involved at all. But it's very simple. You just heat up butter until it foams, let it sit, and if you pour it into like a glass jar or a Pyrex, like pourable measuring utensil implement, you can see it separate, and then you can skim what's off the top, and then you can even let it set up in your fridge. Once you've skimmed the top off, put it in your fridge, let it kind of solidify, and then you can take what is that golden off the top. And a lot of times when you're making ghee, you're even putting a pinch of turmeric in there, or you're putting some seasoning elements into the oil when you're kind of doing that little bit of fry and boil, to get some flavor worked into there. So a lot of the curries that are made with ghee have a flavored ghee. So somebody has a batch of ghee at their house that they've made, and we know the cow is sacred in India and South Asia. So making use of that, like you said, a time-honored tradition, I think is very important. So hopefully that's helpful. as well. But let's get into our spices here, our garam masala. So I have more spices than we talked about in that recipe, and I'm doing that intentionally because, like I said, we didn't want to have you shop for all of these because it can get very expensive very quickly, and it can also just become overwhelming and kind of be a little bit of a hill to get over to even want to start a recipe like this. So starting with a foundational recipe like we have with Common Threads, I think is a great starting point. And again, no shame at all. I have 2 curry blends in my pantry. And so sometimes in a pinch, this is what I want. And I've got them from some pretty great suppliers. So this one's West Coast. You might see Morton and Bassett out there. This is a distributor in the Midwest called the Spice House. So some of these like higher end, if you're going to spend a little extra money somewhere, I encourage it with your spices, because some of the really bottom of the barrel spices can be pretty dead by the time you get to them, which is why I like whole spices as well. But here we have a Madras curry. This just says just curry. So I'm gonna have to read the label here because this one has coriander, turmeric, fenugreek, cumin, celery seed, nutmeg, red pepper, cardamom. Okay. And then this other one has coriander, turmeric, chili peppers, salt, cumin, fennel, black pepper, garlic, ginger, fenugreek, cinnamon, cloves, anise, mustard. So anise, I'm guessing it's fennel seed here, the seed of the anise plant or fennel plant. So much different. This one's going to be a lot spice forward. Madras curries are often used in a chicken dish, and it's a big and a lot of tomato and tomato paste, and it's got a lot of spice forward. So this one obviously looks a lot more golden and might yield a more golden rich. Maybe I would use this for like a dal, for a lentil dish, if I did like yellow or red lentil dal, and I would get this like nice rust color or orange hue to my curry. But here in front of us, we're gonna explore the spices. So we have nutmeg. I definitely encourage getting the whole nutmeg in a jar. It'll last you for quite some time, and it'll keep on your shelf because you buy a little container. This is one of those spices like star anise or cardamom. You buy a container of ground, and it's going to sit there for a very long time before you can get to using all of it, unless you're making a lot of garam masala blends and distributing them for like, family holidays or something like that. So I have a microplane here just to show that I'm going to go ahead and just grate some of this onto my tray. So right underneath here, I have some cinnamon, I have ground coriander, I have red pepper flakes, which are actually some Calabrian chili flakes. So again, I'm kind of crossing the world a little bit. And then I've got some turmeric there as well, some ground turmeric. You could even play with some fresh turmeric too, just like we have fresh ginger as opposed to ground ginger. A lot of the spice blends will have ground ginger though. So the nutmeg is just so aromatic too, and it's really really satisfying once you get that going. And then on my left here, what I have are some whole spices that we talked through. Black peppercorn we're familiar with. These are the green cardamom pods that they actually have little seeds in them, and the whole thing is edible. Sometimes the exterior pod doesn't make its way in. I'll show you there in a minute. These are fennel seeds or anise, and then we have star anise, which that maybe could have been referencing, and they're both of the anise family. We've got brown and yellow mustard seeds. There's also black mustard seeds. I love mustard seeds, and again, it's maybe a regional thing. It wasn't in our recipe, but I've worked them in. We've got cumin, heavy on the cumin seed, clove, and then fenugreek. If you've never had fenugreek, it's a bittering agent. So you talk about balancing sweet, salty, sour, fatty, umami flavors, all of our senses. That sour, that bitter is even working its way in here with the spices, with that fenugreek. And then I've got some bay leaf that sometimes makes its way in. So again, I've got all these spices, all these different jars. I'm not biased necessarily towards one or another, but I like to just always encourage whole spices when possible. And a lot of times the best place to order spices is from a reputable like online spice store or a local spice store that you work with that just focuses on that, because what they're doing is turning product a lot. And by moving inventory, it's fresh, fresh dried, but it's fresh. So what I have here, I've got my whole spices. I want to bloom, what I call bloom them. So I'll just start them in a pan. I don't want them, I want them to be a single layer, and I'm going to start them over medium heat. And when I start to just smell them, they become aromatic. That's when I want to turn the heat off. Be wary that mustard seeds will pop. So maybe I'm going to try to like cover them up a little bit with, with my bay leaves, but they will pop and they may make a little mess. I'm prepared for that, and that's okay. So I'm going to toast them, then I'm going to let them cool a little bit and put them in my, you could have a spice grinder dedicated just for spices, not to be mixed with your coffee grinder if you have the one and the same. And then I just have like a mortar and pestle though here. So all I'm going to do here is just turn my pan. I don't think I need to move the camera for this, but I'm just turning my pan on medium. And this is something that you all can do in lieu of just grinding the spices. It's just going to kind of bring out their qualities and going to really help. And so I don't have to toast them as hard in my pan. But what I'll do here is I have the ones that were ground, and I'm going to go ahead and put those in my mortar and pestle. They're going to kind of help work my other spices down. So that's that. But you can see they come in all different sizes. I've got in Brooklyn, there's an amazing place called Sahadi's. That doesn't help you all because you're kind of in the opposite corner of the world, but Sahadi's does ship. There's a place called Kalustyan's that ship. I don't work for them. I'm not getting any kickbacks. I just think they're both really great, amazing places. There, if you ever come to New York City, Kalustyan's, you could spend a whole day in their store. It's amazing. And then the Spice House is they have a headquarter in Chicago too. I will always try to plug Chicago. But then, yeah, these other spices is everything from Whole Foods to other just brands. So again, don't try to overthink it. Just be curious and grab something that maybe you haven't cooked with before in this case and try it out. So, so I've got my, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say here locally, one of my favorite in Seattle, one of my favorite places is World Spice. It's in the Pike Market and they do a lot of mail order. If you go to their website, it's World Spice, and they've got so many different blends and single herbs. And Tom Douglas apparently gets his herbs there for his restaurants. He's kind of a celebrity chef here in Seattle, and they're very high quality. And I feel like I'm just traveling around the world when I go there.
Amazing. Oh, great tip. Sorry, I was rambling about every city but yours. I'm like not being helpful at all in that sense. But yeah, to Kelly's point, find somebody who's like obsessed with that thing being spices there. And not only will you find really great quality, but you'll also find somebody who's passionate about it and wanting to share recipes and dishes that you can use them for. If you can hear, I actually have my earbuds in, so you can probably hear it popping. Those are my mustard seeds. And that's really all I'm going to do is just kind of, I'm going to leave it at that for now, just so we're not sitting here all day. But they're perfumed. I can smell it. The ones that you're going to smell especially are the cardamom and the cumin. Mustard seeds don't really have a huge immense smell, and peppercorns are kind of get buried by the other ones, but cardamom and the clove, fennel seed, and cumin. So what I'm going to do here is just let these cool down. I don't want them to go much further. So I'm going to let them just cool down just for a moment while we jump into some of our foundational ingredients for our chana masala. Okay. So what I have there, what I just put together is probably about almost a half cup worth of spices. So I'll probably easily get a couple of recipes out of this. I can just start to smash this a little bit, but while they're still steaming, I want them to just kind of steam off and dry out a little bit because there is a tiny bit of moisture that's in there. Okay. All right. So moving along, if I'm going to jump back to, we've gotten our recipe here. I just want to make sure so we're talking about a half of an onion, half of a jalapeno, an inch of ginger, and then 3 cloves of garlic. So if you're cooking along with me there, that's 3 cloves, 1 inch, half of an onion, and a half of a jalapeno. So again, in my case, I've got a couple extra, and I also have a little bit extra just so when I'm demoing things, I can cut more than just a half of an onion. But I've got I actually have some sliced jalapeno that I want to go ahead and use up. I have way more than I need here, but always good to have some things on hand. So, all right, so with my onion here, we'll do quick knife skills, just talk through a couple foundational techniques. I pinch my finger. If you're right-handed, left-handed, doesn't matter, thumb and forefinger, okay, on the bolster of your knife. And then your other fingers just wrap around gently, kind of like a drumstick if you play drums or percussion or anything. And then there's three kinds of cuts that we're gonna probably walk through, mostly this one, just your rolling cut. And we don't need the knife to go off the board, and you don't need to lift it any higher than you're comfortable with. If I'm doing it to the other way so you can see from the other camera, if you have that pinned, but I'm rolling, I'm kind of like a bike wheel or a train wheel, kind of churning. All right, and then our other hand is gonna be like a claw, like a bear claw, or holding the knuckleball. And then I use whatever one of my fingers kind of protrudes the most as my backstop. So you can just sit there and practice that motion right here and just get used to that. Cut a lot of celery, cut a lot of onions, cut a lot of carrots, and make vegetable stock if you want to practice. And just get used to that. And you want to be square to your board. You want your knife to be smaller than the diagonal of your board, or else it's too big for whatever board, or vice versa. And then our other cuts are going to be, if we did a tunnel cut here, I'm literally putting my knife down, making a tunnel. So this is for something that is higher than the board, and I'm lifting it off the board. I want control, and I'm a little unsteady. So we'll get there in a second. And then the other cut that we'll use when we're like kind of mincing things or going through herbs is like the rock and chop. And you have your one hand as a pivot point, and then I kind of just pinch the rest of my knife, and I'm going back and forth, back and forth. All this is good and well, and your knife skills are great. Your knife needs to be sharp though, so make sure to just take care of your knife. You can get it sharpened, but this is just a honing steel, so this won't necessarily sharpen it, but it will bring the teeth of your knife together. Japanese knives just have like one side to them, so they're beveled like this, straight and angled. But then most other knives, your just classic chef's knife is an angle that's at about a 21 degree angle. So if I'm going to hone my knife, I just need to be running this along my honing steel with a little bit of pressure and going equally in opposite sides. And what I want to do to get that good angle is, if I'm at 90 degrees, I cut it in half, I'm at 45. And then if I roughly cut it in half again, I'm at like 22 and a half to be exact. But that's about the angle that we want to be going back and forth. So this is just one way to get your knife. Every time before I start cutting, I'll do that. And at the end of my cutting session. And then I have a towel that I don't use for ingredients. It's just like a side towel, because as you can see there's a little bit of like metal filings that do come off. And we don't want that in our food. So go ahead and wipe that. Okay. Onion, I'm gonna cut the little top of this onion off here as little as possible. If the skin on my onion is clean, I'm gonna save it. I put it in the Ziploc bag, put it in my freezer, save it for vegetable stock. The yellow onion peels will turn your stock nice and golden too. Okay. So now this is where I've got a flat top. I'm going to use my tunnel cut here to go right through the root. Okay, and now I've got my two halves. I keep my root intact. That's going to help me when I'm going to dice my onion. Okay, so I want to get a really fine dice on this onion to cook it first. The smaller it is, the quicker it's going to break down. Again, this outer layer I can take and save for my vegetable stock. And please, if there's any questions, or Kelly, you want to chime in, please interrupt me. I got my screen down, so I can't quite see everything that's happening right now.
One of the things that I could add here, just with some of these ingredients, they're excellent examples of prebiotics. So prebiotics help feed the bacteria in our gut, and the more variety of those different types of foods we can get in our diet, the more we encourage diversity of our microbiome, which helps to promote gut health and brain health. And one of the things you brought up with the fenugreek being a bitter, there are some other qualities to some of these herbs like bitters, and then there's an aspect called carminative, which many of the herbs are either bitter or carminatives, and many of them have both of those properties. And what those do is the bitters can help stimulate digestion, And so we have bitter receptors throughout our gut. And when we taste bitter, either in our mouth or we have the receptors in our gut, it actually stimulates peristalsis, or movement of our digestive tract. So it can help with constipation. And if you ever have heartburn or something like that, it can help with that. And the carminatives are really great for helping to reduce gas and bloating. So a lot of the herbs like the cumin and the cardamom, the coriander, the star anise, like a lot of those different herbs have those phytochemicals that act as carminatives to help reduce gas and bloating. So if they're mixed with legumes, that can be helpful.
Awesome. I definitely didn't know that about like the bitter with the fenugreek. So thank you for that, especially. Awesome. Let's go ahead and chop or dice our onion. You may have seen a technique before where you cut down like piano keys and then you go across, like cutting like sheets in a book. I find this cut to be a little dangerous sometimes, because especially if it's like slippery or your knife is being on, or your knife or onion is being ornery. But the way I look at it is I was taught this by a chef once. You've got arcs to your onion. They're all concentric circles that are working together when it's together. So what I like to do is follow that arc. And if I follow that arc with my slices, my docking slices, these like piano keys, if you will, then I don't need to do this cross cut, because they'll all break down together when I come back across this way. Because the idea is that a lot of people go 1 cut, 2 cut, and then 3 cut. Whereas I'm just going to go 1 cut around and then 2 cuts there. Okay. And then kind of save my hand from getting stabbed, hopefully. Right. So I'm still going to kind of do a little knuckle claw here. I've got a very stable ingredient. I've got my root still on, so it stays intact. And the goal here is to cut from right close to the root and through to the middle. So like the center, the axis is my center point is my goal. So I'm going to come here, and actually in this case, I'm kind of lifting my knife a little bit, but I'm just going to come through and I'm just going to cut and let the knife do the work. And it gets, you start to cut towards you here. So you got to kind of like offset your hand just a little bit. But you're going to see, if you've ever seen like one of the, like an Awesome Blossom kind of thing, it's basically what I did here. So I've cut around, followed like the rays of the sun, if you will. Okay, and you can see all my cuts. So now I'm going to go back across. This is where I have my knuckle tucked. I've got the tip of my knife on the board. I'm going to be doing this motion. Okay, and then I'm just going to come back across. And the goal will be to cut about as wide as the slices that I made prior, so that I have as close to a square as possible. It's a round item, so we'd have to waste a lot to get perfect squares, a perfect dice. But in this case, I can just go ahead and come across, and I don't need that one dangerous cut. So right here towards the end, I'm getting a little tippy, getting a little unsteady, so I can just knock it over and then go back across and try not to waste any of this root, but I'm not using the root itself, this little chunk here. If I trim off that root, then I can put this in my stock bag as well, but it gets a little bitter in a bad way down there. Okay, and then I brought a dough card or a bench scrape here into the mix, just so I could show that you don't always want to, sometimes you wipe your knife really quick and you're not watching, and then you end up wiping your finger right on the blade in a bad way. So, but as I show you here, these will all break down, and I've got this nice little dice across the way. Okay, so this is a good thing to practice. Worst case, you have some soup or some stock to make. But again, I'm following the arc of the onion. I'm cutting towards my center axis. I'm getting the tip of my knife about as far as I can towards the end, but without cutting all the way through. So I'm leaving my root intact. And then I've got my knuckles tucked, even my thumb, and go nice and slow as you need. And then I can just kind of finish off the bottom to get the last little pieces out of this. And a nice sharp knife too will help keep you from having as many tears, like activating your lacrimators in your eyes with the chemical that's released out of the onion when you cut the cell wall. If you wear glasses, it'll help a little bit, or I guess you could put on chemistry goggles. That would really help. But there we go. So we've got, this is one whole onion. This is more than you would need for your 1 times recipe. But again, I'm want to demo a little extra and also double my recipe. I got a nice big pan here. Okay. So your half onion or full onion is done, depending on if you're 1 or 2 times the recipe. Okay, so we've got our onions here. I might as well get these started because that's, make sure what it says here. I believe it says over medium heat. So I'm gonna go ahead. I think I may start to shift. I'll shift my camera over here. So we'll turn it into the second half of the camera and get it on our stove. There. Okay. Okay, great. As you can see, I've got some olive oil here that I used to cook with. I bought into the trend. I bought the trendy olive oil that you might be seeing marketed to you all the time, or if you read the New York Times or something like that. But I'm gonna go ahead. I've got some grapeseed oil here. Or again, if you had ghee, you could be using your ghee here. And I've got this over medium heat. I'm gonna wait for my oil to heat up just a little bit. I want it to be a little more free flowing. As it is, it'll shimmer when it's ready. While that's just heating up just for a moment, I'm gonna go back to my board here just for a second. We're gonna peel our ginger. 2 ways you can peel your ginger. You can peel your ginger with a peeler, or if you've seen the fancy trick from a TV show or one of your friends or something, or the party trick of a spoon to get into those little nooks, right? If I've got this little weird thing and I don't want to lose that all, I can just take my spoon and I'm holding it like high and tight in my hand here, and I just go ahead and scrape. So I can go ahead and do that.
Jared?
And I could, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Somebody had made a comment about the onions making you cry when you cut them. Is there anything that you found? Somebody said that using goggles didn't help, and I haven't really ever found anything that helped. So
well, if you had like sealed goggles, and they don't have any like air pockets in them, honestly, a sharp knife helps. And the more humid or hot it is in the environment that you're cooking, that chemical that's released into the air will travel faster. Like I used to in banquet kitchens, when you had to cut like 50 pounds of onions at a time, we would do it in the giant walk-in cooler because it wouldn't affect you as much. So a little cool breezy air, or if you do start crying, for that matter, go put your head in your freezer, and not your whole head, obviously. Just open your freezer and put your head next to your freezer. And just like hold it there for a second, and it'll help your eyes recover a little more quickly than if you're just sitting there rubbing them and crying. So those are my tips. Somebody, I don't know, some people say bite, put a piece of bread in your mouth, or bite a silver spoon, or I don't know. I think just my biggest tip is just finish cutting the onion and move on to something else. All right, so our oil's shimmering here. I can see that it's moving. I can always test a piece of an onion too to see if it sizzles. All right, so I'm going to use some of my salt here. I believe it's half of my salt. The sizzle is good, obviously. It's the moisture from the onion. It is starting to do its work already. I'm going to turn this fan on just a little bit, just so that we have a little circulation. Tell me if that's messing with my audio at all. I can turn it down. But what we're doing here is just concentrating the flavor of our onion. We're cooking the moisture out. The salt is going to help pull the moisture out, but it's also going to help make our onion break down and taste more like it should, taste sweeter. And then in addition to that, another trick, if you really want to get nice caramelized onions, a baking soda will help break down your onion, just like it would if you put some baking soda in your pot of chickpeas when you're cooking them. It'll make them like fluffy and break down. Baking soda will act to do the same with onion. Just a little bit. I would say like for an onion, maybe a quarter teaspoon at most, like a pinch. So we're gonna let those cook a little bit. I'm gonna move back to my board. I've got my garlic here that I'm throwing some of it around. I don't know where that piece went. We're gonna let it be. All right, so I've got 3 cloves here. I'm peeling them by hand, or I could go ahead and use the back of my knife and just give a little whack. So under the fattest part of my knife, 1 hit, and then it should just release the skin a little bit. Now, if you needed the garlic completely whole, I wouldn't recommend doing the whack because it's gonna split it somewhere. But since we're gonna go ahead and chop this or mince this, we could go ahead and break it up. Some people, again, tricks galore. You could put them between 2 bowls and shake them and wake all your neighbors. You can put it in a brown paper bag and shake it, and it kind of works sometimes. A lot depends on how old and dry and or fresh the garlic is. The garlic changes throughout the year, depending on how long it's dried, depending on how long it's set on the counter. Okay. I'm just tossing my onions a little just to keep them moving, but going back, I got garlic and ginger here. I could go ahead and just start chopping these into chunks and going across, and then I could go do my rock and chop, which I'll do maybe in a second. But with ginger especially, there's a lot of fibers in here that sometimes you can't get away from. And so I have a second microplane that has bigger teeth, or maybe you have a box grater that has like the medium-sized teeth, not the cheese setting and not the tiny fine setting. But if I'm taking this here, I've got some really nice grated ginger that's already minced for me. I love the smell. And then it's also kind of working the fibrous material out of the way. As you can see, it's kind of building up on my microplane. Again, if you were gonna be making this dish a lot, or let's say you were making a really big batch, I'd almost encourage you to just go food processor or blender. Put ginger, break it down a little bit, chunks of ginger, cloves of garlic, your onion, maybe chunk it down, and a couple pieces of your jalapeno or serrano, and then just blitz it up for a little bit until it's kind of pasty. And that's how I've seen a lot of people do it in their cooking. Okay, so I could do the same here with my garlic. To take some of the bite off of the garlic, you can grate it directly into some lemon juice. Obviously, in this case, we're not going to do that because I'm not going to saute my garlic with soaking in lemon juice. It would cause us some problems. It wouldn't result in how we want it. But if you were just going to use it for something like a pesto and keep it raw, the acidulation of the lemon juice there really helps. And it helps it from oxidizing too. Okay, so I'm just doing a couple of these just to show you that you can do it with both the microplane or your knife. I'm getting some nice color on my onions already. I'm going to turn down the heat just a tiny bit while I finish my onion and garlic and ginger here. And the recipe calls for, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that if people wanted to cheat and get it already pre-prepared, Trader Joe's sells garlic and onion in these little frozen cells that you can just pop out. And I believe each one's like a clove of garlic or, you know, like a teaspoon of ginger. So it's pretty easy if you don't have the time, if you're trying to pull it together quickly.
Totally. A great tip. I would much prefer to see that rather than the jar of pre-chopped garlic. It just is going to be fresher, and because they're going to freeze it right away, right when they chop it, as opposed to sitting in like a solution and in a brine. Or in the same sense, you could take a tip from Trader Joe's and then do the same thing yourself. Have an ice cube tray dedicated to things like flavored oils and ginger garlic paste, stuff like that. And then, you know, you can calibrate your recipe. Usually a nice ice cube is a good 2 tablespoons if you fill it. Awesome. Thank you for saying that, Kelly.
Chef, I
You
have
always want,
sorry if I may. I
Yeah.
have comments here. The first thing that we all understand, it's taking a little bit longer than expected because this is our first session cooking for this series, and chef is educating us regarding the cutting and what kind of knife and everything else. But the other sessions, hopefully we can go faster. But two other things regarding when it comes to nutrition. As you have noticed that we put our spices in oil, and we're going to use oil because a lot of the phytonutrients that we have, they're fat soluble. So when you put them in heat and you put them in oil, they start releasing these phytonutrients, these spices, and then the nutritional value it's increased. The other thing is that by chopping, we are actually breaking the fibers and we are breaking the cell membranes. Remember that a lot of these phytonutrients are trapped inside the cell, and we have to break shell. We have to break the fiber to get it released. And by breaking, by chopping, by cooking, these are all the techniques that we use to kind of release that phytonutrients that they have the antioxidants and they bring the flavor. Just looking at what we have here, we have a lot of onion, we have a lot of garlic. These are, as Kelly mentioned, there are prebiotics. They are going to go into the digestive system and create the environment for the probiotics that when they come in, they can actually sit there and they can, it's just like the medium for them. So just this comment said, we definitely need heat and oil to release the phytonutrients. And by using just like, we need some technique to break the fibers and break the cell shells to all cell membranes to release these phytonutrients and get the active ingredients out.
Great. Thank you. And yeah, and apologies to everybody that we are, you know, we're going through a lot of content and we're running a little longer. We actually are through a good portion of that initial part and we've got our spices down. I'm actually on my other, there we go. I'm grinding them now down through. And this foundational base of our chana masala, once we get the chickpeas in there and stewing it, it shouldn't be much longer after that. And we can whip our rice and we're going to come together quite quickly. So thanks to everybody for being patient. And I think we're recording this too in case people do have to hop off. Okay, so what I'm doing here is just grinding. These spices have dried out a little bit. You can almost see I've got a little bit of like kind of the shells of the cardamom pods. And if you don't want to have to go through and pick through all this, what I can do is put it over a sieve and kind of shake out what I have here. And then I can see what isn't broken down and just keep working through that. So some of this I can break down a little bit further. But I'm at just about how much I would need here. And a lot of this is the cardamom shell here working out. So I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, so I've got my spices over here. I'll keep those off to the side while my ginger, garlic, and onion is cooking down. If you notice it's getting a little dry, which mine is just a tiny bit, I'm just going to add a tiny bit more oil. I'm going to go ahead and wipe my board here. What I want to do is get myself a little bit of jalapeno chopped. I need some for my raita too, so I'm thinking ahead. And I'm doing this last so that my board isn't crazy hot for everything. Or at least if I'm doing it, I'm going to flip my board over. So here I am. I'm going to do my rock and chop here. I already had some sliced jalapeno. And if you're really averse to having spice on your hands and you're afraid you're going to touch your eyes or something, you can go ahead and put some gloves on for this and then come back to it. But my goal will be after I do this, I'm going to go ahead and just flip my board over. Okay. And this doesn't need to be perfect. These are going to kind of melt down in. What I don't want is a giant piece for my raita. Okay. So I've got a good amount here to cover what I need for both. I'm going to put a little bit in with my cucumbers here. So I'm jumping ahead to my raita. I've got some chopped cucumbers in there. And then I've got my jalapeno. Again, it could be serrano if you wanted a little extra heat. I'm going to flip my board here just to kind of reset. Also helps to keep things clean there. And then we'll go back to the stove really quick just to get the rest of this going. So I've got my jalapeno in here. Again, everything is really, that ginger was a little dry, so it's really soaking things up. I'm going to put a little more oil in here because you're adding your oil in stages in the recipe. And now I'm going to go ahead and get all my spices worked in here and get a nice little toast on this. And this is really where, if you thought toasting your spices in the pan was going to make things aromatic, this is really going to perfume your house in the best way. Better than any candle. Okay. And you want to keep an eye on this now, because the key to a good curry like this is to really bring out all the flavors and toast your spices. But the last thing you want to do is completely burn it and walk away, take a phone call and burn it. You can see that I'm getting a little bit of stickiness on the bottom of the pan. That's okay. We'll call that our fond. There's different terms for that in different cultures and parts of the world, but that's kind of a lot of flavor buildup and caramelization is happening. And so I'm going to let this go just for one more minute. And then I've got a little bit of water before. We have water on hand to thin out our dish to let it stew. Because if we just do the chickpeas and the tomato, it's going to cook down and get too thick too quick. So I want to go ahead here and let these cook. You can see on my pan, if I lift this up just a little bit, you can see that nice sticky part in the middle. That is a ton of good flavor. I'm going to take some water, watch out for the steam. And then I'm going to use my flat spoon here to kind of lift all of that up. The steam is going to help lift it. Okay, this is great. So now I've got that cooking away. I'm going to really quickly just drain off my chickpeas that I opened. I've got 2 cans. Your recipe calls for 1 can if you're doing it one time, 2 cans if you're doing it two times, obviously. I can save some of this liquid. It's the aquafaba. It can act like an egg white if you do vegan baking or vegan mixology and you stick away from eggs. The aquafaba that exists in and the lecithin in the chickpea liquid will act as that binding agent. You can make vegan mayonnaise with it too. You just swap out a tablespoon of that chickpea liquid for an egg white. All right, now I've got my fire roasted tomatoes, calls for 14 ounces. I've got a 28 ounce can. Again, I'm just reiterating all my doubling here. Okay, so we've got a really nice dish coming together already because we built that foundation. We took our time, we toasted our spices, we hand ground a lot of them. We chopped all that good garlic, ginger, chili, everything. So now I'm just going to let this sit over medium-low heat. I've got my water on standby. I'm going to hit it with just a little bit more salt right now because we only had salt in our onion. There's a little salt in our beans. There's a little salt in our tomatoes. I can always add. I can't take away, right? Okay, moving right along. Great. If we come back to our board, I've got my I got my lemon here. So my lemon, I'm going to end up squeezing half of this lemon into the dish. So I'm going to go ahead and set that aside. The rest of the lemon I want to save for garnish. So I've just got that here. And then the rest of my lemon, I'm going to get rid of a couple of these big seeds that exist. And I love to squeeze some fresh lemon or lime if that's your thing. Just as little wedges to have. So if I have 8 servings, I want 8 wedges. If I have 4 servings, I want 4 wedges. But I've got that here. I can even just make sure that I don't have any seeds. Nobody wants to fish out seeds. They don't have to. Okay. All right. So then again, I remember it said in the recipe to add your cilantro earlier. I'm going to err to keep it and add it at the end, even just as a garnish. I can jump into those spices really quick. We'll talk about them very quickly, and Kelly can comment on that as well if she'd like to point out any of these particular herbs that I talk about. But of course, we've got cilantro or fresh coriander. I've got, which is right here. You can tell the leaf is much different than our parsley. Our parsley is spikier. It grows in clusters like that. And our cilantro is going to be a little flatter, a little softer and more delicate. But I do have parsley here too. Not as traditional. The cilantro is definitely traditional. I even got some mint, and then I've got some scallion tops. So just because I had some of those extra, so I can use all of these. I can mix some of them in with the curry if I want. I can just use them all as like a mixed garnish. Okay, so I've got my scallions there. I usually don't like to do a lot of the rock and chop on my scallions because it'll make them kind of mushy and watery. But everything else, I've got my mint. I'll show you this little trick here. Mint, cilantro, parsley. I bundle it up, and it just means I need less cuts to get through.
One of the nice things about this this recipe, obviously, this is a time-honored, cultural, traditional recipe as a condiment, but it has so many properties that help with digestion. And so, these herbs, they're all of them have what we call carminative value, which helps to reduce gas and bloating. The leafy parts of the herbs have a lot of similar properties to other leafy greens. So vitamin K, and they'll have vitamin A and other nutrients that, many of these are important for helping to build and repair cells. And then we have the yogurt, which has the probiotics, so it actually has the good bacteria. And then it also has onion, which has prebiotic in it. So it's, obviously flavorful and adds that kind of high note to what otherwise could be pretty earthy taste with all the spices and the legumes. But it has so many digestive properties. And of course, all of these plant-based foods also have anti-inflammatory properties, which we know is really beneficial not only for the gut, but to help with brain health as well.
Okay, so now lastly, I'm just giving I've got kind of like a very soft boil going on over here. It's kind of gurgling. It's reducing down. All these flavors are coming together. I will add some of those spices in just a little bit. I'm keeping an eye to see if it needs any water. But what I'm going to do here is pull up this raita recipe very quickly and share that. This we pulled this from another website just because we didn't have one necessarily on Common Thread straight away, and didn't want to try to pass off something else as our own by any means. But there's a lot of ways to make raita too. But in essence, as we've talked about, it's a yogurt sauce. So we've got yogurt. We've got some onion chopped. We've got cucumber, salt, chilies. We talked about the jalapeno there. Some fresh coriander leaves or cilantro, and then the cumin powder or roasted jeera, which is optional here. So this was, I believe, shared as well. So I'll go ahead and just go back to my board here. But I will be walking through this and talking through the volumes again. So if we have 1 cup of our, I'm going to pull my screen back down. How about that? So I've got, again, I'm doing a little bit of double action here. Hopefully my math isn't driving too many people crazy here, but I've got some yogurt. I actually had some lime worked into this, so this is a perfect yogurt to use. But this is some nice local fresh yogurt with just active cultures and yogurt. That's it. I'm going to do the tiniest pinch of salt here. My lime is going to really help me in that sense. I'm going to use the zest and the juice of the lime. So what I already had in here was zest, but I'm going to keep supercharging it these essential oils in the skin. As long as you got a clean exterior, it's really, really nice and brightens everything up. The raita here, for any spicy curry especially, is used as a cooling agent. So every condiment and every garnish has a reason. Of course, flavor. Of course, it's gonna like stimulate your senses and do a lot of good things. But the lime here is gonna help with some brightness, and then the yogurt being this chilled dairy product. Again, if you're vegan, maybe you're getting a nut or an oat-based yogurt here to make your raita. But this doesn't need to be thick. You don't need Greek yogurt. You can almost see this is almost, it almost looks wimpy and thin, but it's not. It's really nice, and it should just be able to be poured and drizzled. I've got my finely diced cucumber and jalapeno. I'm gonna go with some, I've got my pre-ground cumin here because I used up all of my other cumin. I'll go ahead and pop that in. I'm gonna roughly chop some cilantro. It doesn't need to be, I don't need to mince this. I just want to get a nice rough chop on this so that it's not too unwieldy and I can still drizzle. Again, I'm using my little bundling rolling action. Okay.
You make it look so easy. So probably if people aren't used to it, they should go a little slower, right?
Yeah, you definitely go a little slower. I just want to be mindful of everybody's time here, knowing that not every, I don't think everybody's cooking straight away along right now. And if you are, you can come back and make this right. The chana masala you can turn the heat down and just let it very slowly simmer while you're finishing up with stuff like this. But this will get you another good practice on your knife skills here, because we're going to go back to an onion really quick. This is a pretty big onion to use a full onion if I'm doubling my recipe. So I'm going to go ahead and just use half of this. And again, I'm just cutting a little bit of the top off, taking the skin off here. I wouldn't recommend doing a pureed or like a minced onion here, because it would be a little overpowering. I would just get a really, really fine dice. The more you break it down, the more you cut it, the more intense it's gonna, intensely it's gonna permeate your dish. So instead here, I'm just gonna do a nice finer dice. Again, take your time, build up your confidence cutting. And again, all the scraps, if you have a lot of scraps, you might just have a lot of vegetable stock or chicken stock or something, whatever you're making at home. Okay. So that's it. I mean, it came together that quickly. I can always check that for seasoning, but raitas always have nice chopped vegetables in it. You could even take your cucumber, if it wasn't too mushy of like too wet of a cucumber, you could even just grate that as well. And if you thought it was too liquidy, you could grate it and then use some cheesecloth or use a tea towel and squeeze out the excess moisture to concentrate the flavor. But right here, I'm just going to take some of this. I'm going to start to get all my garnishes together, because my chana masala is pretty much there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. If we're going to go back to our board now, I'm going to take my lemon and my spices, or go away from my board, go back to the stovetop. You see it's nice and gurgling away. It's still got some loose nature to it. I'm going to go ahead and just squeeze my lemon over my hand. If you're afraid seeds are going to get in, you can squeeze it over a sieve. I'm going to put some of my herbs, those roughly chopped herbs, just straight in here. I can taste it to make sure that my seasoning's okay. Again, you can always add salt. You can't take it away. I think I'm going to serve this with some nice brown basmati rice. Or a lot of times, like I mentioned before, you get the jeera rice. You get the rice with toasted cumin seeds in it. A lot of these spices you can put into rice to make like a really nice aromatic rice, as long as you pick them out. Like I'll put a star anise or some cardamom pods in my rice while it's cooking, and it adds some really incredible flavor. What you don't want to do is leave that in there because that'll ruin somebody's meal if they go and bite and chew on a whole cardamom pod. It's not exactly the most enjoyable thing, but okay, so that's coming together beautifully.
When we were
I'm gonna
talking
go ahead
earlier,
and clear my deck.
you were mentioning that turmeric would also be something that could be added to this, and turmeric is a spice that's really beneficial for the gut and also the brain. It has that curcumin in it, which can cross the blood-brain barrier and can help reduce if there's any type of inflammation. There's studies that show that might be protective against Alzheimer's and dementia. And one of the things that's really interesting about these phytochemicals is that we do have systems in our body that almost prevent us from absorbing them. So they're compounds that plants make to protect them. And, you know, sometimes our bodies think that they might be a threat. But the more that we have, if we're having a curry, if we're having a variety of different herbs and spices all at once, more of them will get absorbed. And if we're having them in oil, like those spices that are more like seeds, they will, like the nutrients will be absorbed more through having that fat medium. And so we can do some things with our cooking and our preparation by combining different herbs and spices and by adding some of those fats. Black pepper, actually, pepperine is a compound in black pepper that also really helps the absorption of a lot of these different herbs and spices. It kind of irritates, in a way, the gut, not to a point where it causes inflammation, but that it actually helps with absorption of some of these phytonutrients. So you might see that pepper is added many times in dietary supplements to help absorb, but also traditionally used in cooking to help with absorption of those phytochemicals, phytonutrients. They're called by different names.
Thank you.
Thank you for adding all that. Yes. Okay, awesome. So I don't know if anybody was whipping along with me, but I've got what is probably a portion for at least two people, two very hungry people, or maybe four if we've got some nice rice and naan with this. Our wedged lemon and some raita and coriander here, or our herb mix here on the side. So this alone with some rice would be just a lovely meal. Bonus points if you've got some kind of crusty or pita-like bread on the side as well. So yeah, I hope this was helpful and fruitful in many ways. I'm tempted to dive into this. It's a little late on my end. I'm going to be honest, I already ate dinner, so I'm probably saving this. This is going to be a perfect reheat for tomorrow because we've got a late clock here on the East Coast. But pleasure cooking with you all. I hope, especially with our other esteemed guests and presenters here today, I learned a heck of a lot. And thank you. It's just so fun to cook with people across the country as a result of our virtual world now.
Thank you, Chef. It was wonderful. And matter of fact, I don't cook, but I'm sitting in the kitchen. My partner was doing the cooking, and the whole aroma, and it just has filled the kitchen. And I think our food is ready too. So I really appreciate you spending your time with us this evening. I know it's really late for you being on East Coast. We definitely learned a lot, and from how to chop, how to mix, and how to actually put the ingredients together. Thank you, Kelly, for being part of this presentation and sharing your knowledge about the spices and prebiotics, probiotics, and how to fight inflammation through spices with us. And I hope it was collectively, it was a good session for all of us, that, you know, cooking could be a pleasurable activity. We cook not just because of the flavors, but also for the fact that, you know, there are nutritional value into it. For example, the dish that we have right now, it has prebiotics, has probiotics, it has live bacteria, it ensures anti-inflammatory, healthy gut. And as we learned in the beginning of this session, it will help with protecting our brain and fighting anxiety and depression and other psycho-emotional disorders that might be related to inflammation and gut microbiome imbalance. So with that said, our next session will be next month, and Rachel will be sending the information. Kelly will be presenting, and in that session we'll be talking about nutrition and
Meal planning. So meal planning for optimal brain health.
Wonderful. Meal planning for optimal brain health. And Chef Jared will come back the month after and the month after. We have 2 more sessions with Chef Jared. One of them would be supplements or food. It will be another short presentation, and then Chef will cook with us. And the last session of the series would be food and mood, and will be another short presentation by one of our colleagues, and then Chef Jared will cook with us as well. So with that, I would like to thank everybody. It was great spending this beautiful first day of summer evening with all of you guys, and hope to see you guys in our next presentations. And thank you very much. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It was wonderful. Looks wonderful. Yummy. But I'm going to try mine own. Otherwise, I'll be in trouble. I have to cookies. Okay, I have to
There
eat
you
it.
go.
Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.